Hello, my name is Joan Doyle. I'm an artist and a library assistant, and I'm coming to you today from the Canton Library, which is a branch of the Haywood County Libraries. And today we're going to do a watercolor painting. I've chosen a fall scene, this beautiful picture taken on a path through the woods, and so I chose it because of the lights and the dark and this lovely light corner with the light coming through the trees, and then it's reflected on the path. I think it'll make a wonderful subject for a watercolor painting. I hope you'll join me and learn a little bit about how watercolor works and get addicted like I have been since I was 15 years old. So let's first look at what we will need. So what we will need today is a watercolor pad, which is easily got at any art store. You'll need 3 brushes of varying sizes. I have a 1.5 inch, a size 1 and a size 12 brush. We're also going to use salt. You can get that from your kitchen, hopefully. We'll need 4 colors: ultramarine blue, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and yellow ochre. So you only need 3 tubes of paint. So we'll need 2 glasses of water. One is for cleaning your brush and the other one is for the water that you'll use on your painting. We try to keep these separate. It doesn't always work, but we'll do our best. I also like to tape down my sheet of paper, and you'll also need a paper plate or a palette of some kind. Paper plate will work just great. So that's your equipment for this watercolor painting today. Okay, so I have sketched in my little pathway here on the paper. That's the only thing I'm going to sketch in beforehand, so I know where it is placed. I like to divide the paper into thirds, the idea of thirds. Always keep thirds in your mind. The horizon is about 1/3 of the way up the paper. Also, I've taped my paper down with the blue tape, painter's tape that I mentioned in the video, or maybe I didn't mention it in the video, but that's what I've done with the blue tape. I've taped the paper down because the watercolor paper will rumple and begin to curl if it gets too wet, and so this helps to flatten it and keep it in place. I've also taped it to a board, but you don't have to. You can tape it to your table. This makes it easy for me to pick it up and move it around if I needed to, and then I can put it aside and it doesn't take up my table. I can work on another painting or something. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use my largest brush, and I'm just going to wet the entire page. And when we put wet down on the page and then we put paint down, it's called painting wet onto wet. And what that does is it allows the color, as we put it on, to spread and flow. You're putting water onto water. It'll flow and go where the water is. When we come to the end, we've put a lot of the color in, and we want to put some of these trees in, and I'll show you the picture again. So this will be nice and soft, yellow, light yellow coming in here, and then red, and this gets a little darker around the edges. So we'll basically put the main color down first, and afterwards we'll come back with the darker color and put in some of the trees. And that will be done when the background's dry, because when you put paint onto dry, you can get these nice hard edges along the tree. For now, we're going to go soft watercolor, wet into wet for the background. So I've wet the paper, and usually I hold it up and see, can I see a sheen on it? Because it dries really fast. It takes a lot of water. So I might just add a little bit more water because it just soaked right into the paper, and I can already see that the paper is taking in all that water, and it's also curling a little bit. So I've already mixed up my paints right here. As you'll see, I've added water to them, but I haven't used all the paint that I'll need. I'm going to start in the lightest area. Usually in watercolor we go work light to the dark. In acrylics it's the opposite. You can work all the darks and bring it right up to the light, adding white paint at the end. Watercolor, you have to use the light first and then preserve the light, like colors. So I'll take a little bit of water, a little bit of yellow. We'll add a little bit in there. I don't need no water because it's very pale in that corner. So I'll just drag that yellow in from the corner. And it's a teeny bit orangey. So I'll bring a little bit of orange. That main corner there is going to stay yellow. And as I work out, I'm going to mix some of the red and some of the yellow because it goes from yellow to orange right in the middle of the painting, right around here. And see how it's lovely and soft. And you can even dot in some orange into the yellow, the edge of the brush. Gives it a nice soft edge. And as we work in, I can bring in a bit more yellow. It's a nice vibrant color when you mix the yellow and the orange together. And as you see, I'm just messing with color. I'm having fun with color, making sure that it's all nice and wet and soft. And so we keep working that orange over here, down in here. Remember, I'm not going to worry about the darks as yet. So I'm just going to color the whole page with red and yellow. And we get more red as we go this direction. Nice blending of orange into red. Covering the whole page, nice and soft to begin with. Kind of preserve that little bit of the path as a lighter color because you're getting the light coming from in here and it's going to hit the path right here. So we try and keep that pretty light, but remember we're going to go darker as we work in time. So a little bit more orangey red in there. And at this point we could, what I do is I'll splay the brush like so, and I've dipped it in red, and I can go back then and do stuff like that. Kind of dot in some red, because there's some red going into the orange. And back in here, we've got, you know, lots of shade because there's more trees, and so it'll be a little darker. The other way you can do this is a little bit of spattering. You know, you can put some color on your brush and spatter a little bit. At this point, it's very loose, and we're not going to worry about any of the details. And making sure that it stays pretty wet at this point. I'm going to take a little bit of blue and a little bit of red now to create some of the darks back in here, this part of the painting, and down, making that little bit of a curve in the pathway. So there's a little bit of blue mixed with the red. It gives you a nice shadowy color. Again, splaying the brush and maybe adding a little bit of that blue-red into there. Gives you the impression of leaves. It's still pretty wet. And I'm going to bring some of that darker color in here. We're going to kind of outline the path. Blue and red makes purple. And you can do a variety of purples with that depending on the balance of red and blue. And so I'll edge this path coming over here and See, I've only used one brush so far. Nice, big, bold color. I'm not going to worry about details just yet. It's always good to have tissue available. If you get paint where you don't want it, like I've gotten it over this pathway here, I'm going to just lift it up. People say watercolors are not forgiving, but they are somewhat. If something dries in, it's very hard to lift the color out, but if it hasn't dried in yet and is still wet, you can lift it out. And make that path a little wider right there. We still got the edge of the path. At this point, I think we've got some, let's see, I think we need a little bit more dark in here. I want to splay the brush again and kind of the idea of leaves and stuff in there. A little bit of yellow, red again in here just to give variety. I'm lighting up that little area in there. A bit of yellow. Okay, I think that's good. Now it's still pretty wet, and this is where our salt comes in. Once we add the salt, now I'm just putting a little salt on my palm, and then I'm just going to take pinches of it and drop it in to the darkest areas and to the tree areas, and where it's still pretty wet, you can just about see the salt falling there. But what it's going to do, the salt, what it does is it sucks the pigment and will give you some lovely effects. So we'll just drop that in, and at this point when you put the salt on, you have to stop. You have to stop painting. As you can see, it's very abstract right now. It's just a lovely blend of the darker colors and the lighter colors. And if I wanted that area in there to be a little darker, I could even take some blue right now, and a little bit of red, and even dab in some more. But you see how I dab? I just dab in the paint. I'm not going to paint like brush strokes. I don't want brush strokes at this point. It's just very abstract, and just dabbing in some darker colors there to delineate the edge of the path. You can't do brush strokes when there's salt because you'll brush the salt around. So you can just dab in, drop in actually, so I like to call it. Just drop in some color. We're just barely touching the paper, and then you see it just spreads out. So give you some of that darker colors that you need for the shadows of the trees on the ground. So we've added the salt. I'm just going to take a bit of my ochre and just dab in a little bit of that too, because I want some of that colors in on the ground. Come back with just water to soften an edge, so it's not so harsh. And again, use tissue to lift up some color that you might not have wanted on there in the path. Okay, so at this point I'm just going to leave it alone now. I'm going to let it dry. Once the salt is on, we really have to just let the salt do what it's going to do, and you'll see the effect when we come back and it's dried. So the salt is still doing its work. I'm going to bring this up to the camera so you can see some of the effects of the salt. And I will rub all that salt off after it has dried completely. But it must be dried completely before I touch it, otherwise it will just rub the colors around. We don't want to do that. It's still drying. It has dried quite a bit, but it's not fully dry yet. But in the meantime, I want to define the pathway. So I'm using some yellow and some blue to make a green. And I'm defining the path with some green that's below the trees, the ground below the trees. So I should see I'm just defining a horizon there. The path kind of goes into the distance right there. These are things we can be doing while the salt is drying. But sometimes I will just go away and make a cup of tea and read my book for a little while I wait for the paint to dry, because it is really important that it be fully dry before I rub the salt off, because I'm going to paint some more up here, but that has to be dry first. In watercolors, to get more vibrant colors, because when you mix water and color, it will dry lighter than what you are seeing you are painting. These colors are so vibrant when they're wet, but when they dry off, they kind of lose a little bit of their vibrancy. So in order to get like an intense color, if you see artists who paint flowers and they get really beautiful colors in their flowers, it's because they've layered it, and they'll paint one layer, let it dry, paint another color, let it dry, and sometimes up to 7 or more layers to really achieve the vibrancy that they want. This is still wet, so it's somewhat soft. I'm not getting any, I want to get a hard edge along the edge of the path, but not so much in here. It's just undergrowth and tree leaves that have fallen. It's kind of indistinct what's there. But I want to define the path so you can really see where the path goes through the forest. Darken edge. I'm now using the smallest brush I have. This is actually a rigger. It's got an extra long part of the brush. Normally it would only be this long. It's this long. A rigger is makes it easy to paint the rigging of ships. It's also great for doing grass or tree branches, because you just use the bare tip of it, and that gives you some really nice fine lines for branches or rigging. I find painting very meditative. Just kind of go into another zone when I'm painting. Now there is some leaves and stuff on this path, and we can spatter a little bit maybe later just to get that effect, but I just wanted the path to be very definite and light for right now. Still just kind of waiting for that salt to dry. So the salt is still drying. It does take a while, like I said, go make a cup of tea or something. But while I'm sitting here waiting for it to dry, I thought I might work a little bit in this area here. We have the lightest part right here. Actually, you can see the light coming through the trees right here. So I'm going to work a little bit in that area. Using my middle-sized brush, I'm going to take a little bit of yellow with a little bit of that red to get a very light orange yellow. And I'm going to create a little bit of interest in here, some tree. Imagine the trees, and then the brightest part is the gaps between the leaves. Get the impression of trees over in that corner. It's mostly yellow with a little bit of red. And, you know, I want to soften that edge going out into that lightest part. And so what I will do is go along the edge of that before it's dry with some water. So I'll wash my brush, take a little, not a lot of water on my brush, but you'll see how it will soften the edge. See how it kind of runs out into the water and softens that edge. We don't want a hard edge there because it's a lovely soft area over in that corner. I can work in a little bit back in here. You can see more leaves on the trees, just a variety of colors in there, yellows and oranges, reds. Just dabbling, just have fun. Don't worry about the outcome. With watercolor, you can't worry too much about the outcome. The nice thing about watercolors is they're not really expensive. I mean, when you purchase watercolor, it may seem expensive at the time, but they will last you a long time. They go a long way because you dilute them with water and it just makes them go a long way. So, and often I'll stand back from my painting and squint and see, what do I need here? What do I need there? Am I getting the idea of light coming through there or not? What makes a painting interesting is variety and also contrast. So you want light and you want really dark. I've gone ahead and put some purples in here. That's blue and red mixed together to get some of the dark areas. So as you see, I'm adding a little bit more orange in there. Dabbing it in, not brush stroking it in, because it's forest, it's just leaves, and it's leaves on top of leaves, layered with leaves. And I love how the salt is making this, you know, it's giving you the texture of leaves without having to do all that hard work. It's not hard work. It's fun work. I like that orange. A little bit of red, too much red there, a little bit of yellow and red, make orange. I like how that's kind of flowing down there like a branch of a tree, those colors coming down like that. I'm not going to go in there. Do a little bit of red in here though. I want more orange. Creating a very nice abstract painting right now. That'll be interesting, I think, when we put the tree trunks in. We'll give it more definition and show what it is we're really looking at, rather than, even though this is very pretty on its own. And in this area, the tree trunks will be much lighter than the tree trunks over here. They'll be nice and dark, and I'll show you that picture again, and you can see how it's shaping up. These tree trunks are much lighter in color than these, because they're really standing out in contrast to the background, whereas this is kind of melding into the background a little bit. So we might start putting those in now, because they will only be a little bit darker than what the background is. So a bit more yellow, I think, because the background's yellow. So we need the trunks to be just a slightly darker yellow. We don't get to see the whole trunk. Imagine it behind the leaves there. So you, a little bit of dots can just give you the impression that the trunk of the tree goes down behind these leafy branches. And I added a little bit of purple, blue to that, red and purple to that trunk, just to make it a little bit darker. Branches are coming in from the side, going over to that corner. And that's a few more trunks of trees right there. Fading away into the distance. They get lighter as they go into the distance. I think that works. Use some more of that color for some other branches that are coming back this way. There's some tree trunks coming up through here. Just impressions. Imagine them going behind this foliage here. Continuing up here. Not too dark at this point, but getting darker as we move inward. We only, give a hint of a branch or a trunk of a tree. That we see through a gap in the leaves right there. There's a couple of tree trunks, and even if you just kind of follow that down and maybe put a couple more indications that it's right behind all of this, that you're seeing all these leaves. And there's like this lovely big yellowy branches right in front, but we will finish it down here and ground it onto the ground. So that's, imagine that coming all the way straight down there. And that just, your eye completes it. It says that's a tree that's going behind all of those leaves. Put a couple more in there. See the idea, they're going behind there and they're creating all that beautiful foliage. That's what's creating all that beautiful foliage. I'll put a couple more back in here. This dark one is going to come up here, so I have to wait for that until this is dry, because you want nice hard edges and nice contrast. I can put another one. This one is more in the distance, so it doesn't have to be as dark or contrasty, but it's definitely present there in the background. You can see it's kind of running out because this area is still wet, so I'm not going to work too much there, because I don't want soft edges. When you want to paint trees, you want at least some definition to your tree trunk. With that, right now, I think this is where I'll leave it to completely dry at this point, because I can't do any more work until it is dry and we can finish up the tree trunks, these really dark tree trunks. I showed you here, these guys right here will be nice and dark once this background dries. Okay, so the salt has finally dried, and I have just rubbed it all off so that there's no salt left on here. And you can see now that it's dried and done what it's supposed to do, what a beautiful effect it leaves behind. You can see that. Particularly like it right there. It brings out the light, little, impressions of leaves and bushes. So I'm ready to do the dark trunks of the trees right in this area. And so for that, I'm going to use my medium-sized brush. We're going to use some blue and some red to get a nice dark color, nice dark purple. And so the trunks in that area are medium size. And so I'm going to place one. I think I'm going to place one right here. It's going to be anchored right here in the foreground. So how nice and dark that is. What a nice contrast it makes with the background. It's pretty. And I can even turn it. See, that's why it's nice to have the paper on a board to get that other edge. That's nice and straight. And the base, I like to bring it out onto the ground. It's like grounds it onto the ground. So I'm going to keep it sideways right now because I'm going to do a couple more trees that are coming up. Not quite as straight, maybe not even quite as dark. They're coming up that side. Also grounding that tree. Not quite as big as that one. There's a couple of them, and they're not all straight either. They kind of lean a little bit. So this is wet on dry. We have one back here too. And it started to get a little thick, so I can dry it. And just give an impression of it coming up through the canopy of leaves. One more here, just an idea. It just gives you the idea. And if that tree is going up behind, we have one right here too, it looks like. Sometimes the painting decides where the trees are. It's coming back down here in the distance. Not as dark as the foreground trees. You can see they're going back into the distance there. And maybe these have a couple of branches that come out. You can use the finer brush for the branches. And that's one of the nice things about this rigger brush. Nice and thin. So if I make this one darker than that one, it brings it more to the foreground. It's almost like it's a misty morning or something and everything's disappearing into the background, especially over here. I added some little tiny branches, they're very light. So let's see, what else do we need here? Right here where the trees disappear into the canopy, I'm just putting a little lighter color for the impression of those going up behind the leaves, just so it doesn't look disjointed. And we can always we'll add a little bit more color. Now this will give you the impression that there is a canopy of leaves that is, or a branch of leaves that is coming in front of this. Can even add a little bit more dark color in there just to give you that. And here as well. The reason you can see it is, the reason you can see the bark at that point is because there's an opening. Get that idea. And here as well. It's a little bit too dark. So we can go a little bit orange and make some darker places, you know, under the leaves or whatever. It's just that the leaves above are making shadows on the leaves below. It's looking pretty finished, I think. You know, very often I'll sit with the painting for a few days, and then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and I'll paint it. And then I'll come back and and see, do I like this? What does it need? Sleep on it, wake up, look at it in the morning. Sometimes I'll even hold it up to a mirror. A mirror can, you know, makes it a little bit more objective. You get an objective view because seeing the mirror image is unfamiliar. You're used to looking at it at this angle. And so it's so familiar, it's hard for you to see. I often find in a class, someone will look at the next person's painting and go, wow, that's wonderful. Because they didn't make it and they're not attached to it. And that same person who's thinking, oh, my painting doesn't look great, but you lean over and look at the other person and go, wow, that's really nice. Because you haven't touched it yourself. So when you allow it to sit for a few days, I'll sometimes stick it in a drawer and just forget about it for a while and take it out, you know, a couple of months later and go, wow, I painted that, that's not bad. We can be so critical of our own work. Just putting some shadows in there, because underneath all those leaves and canopy, it gets a little darker. So I think we're almost completely done. You know, it's a good thing to know when to stop before you overdo it or get too niggly with it, and you know, it could ruin something by working on it too much. Okay. I'm just gonna branch or two in here. The idea of it having some branches visible in there. Okay, well, I think we're done. I really hope you enjoyed this. I really hope that it turned out well for you. Also, when it comes, you know, when you feel like you're finished and it's done, but there's some part of it you don't like, you can always place a frame around it or cut a mat that maybe eliminates the part you don't like. So you come and put a frame on it and it changes it. Do we want the whole thing all the way out to the lightest part there? Do we want to take it in here, maybe cut that off? See, this is how you can play around with it once it's done and keep the parts you like and maybe let go of the parts you don't if it didn't all work out. So all kinds of possibilities. But thank you so much for watching. It's been my pleasure, and I hope yours. And thank you for supporting the Haywood County Library.